Children of the Black Goat. Chapter 1. Seeds in the Rain. Rain in the northern borderlands does not fall like rain anywhere else in the world. It does not drop. It hangs in gray, freezing sheets, tasting of rusted iron and rotting earth. The elders say the clouds here have drunk too much smoke from the church's witch-burning pyres, so when they finally weep, they bring down the vengeance of the dead. Silas hated this rain. It soaked through his thick fur cloak, seeping into the old scars, knitting his knee joints together, turning every step into a dull, rhythmic torture. "Keep close," Silas grunted, his gravelly voice half swallowed by the drumming downpour. He didn't turn his head, but his left hand, calloused and scarred, reached back, groping in the wet air until it brushed the rough fabric of the child's tunic. "If you wander off, I'm not coming back for you." It was a lie. They both knew it. Elin, a girl of only 8 winters, trudged silently behind him. She wore an old burlap sack, holes cut for head and arms, which hung like a giant's skin on her starving frame. Under the hood that drooped past her forehead, her face was swallowed by shadow. She said nothing. The wet squelch of her boots in the freezing mud was her only reply. They were cutting through the black woods, a strip of land God had seemingly forgotten, wedged between the kingdom of light and the wildlands. The trunks of ancient oaks twisted like the gnarled fingers of giants trying to claw their way out of the earth, their roots surfacing like wooden pythons slick with moss. "Are we nearly there?" Her voice was small, trembling like a leaf in a gale. Silas stopped. He exhaled sharply, a plume of white steam rising from his lips. He scanned the perimeter. The forest afternoon was bleeding into the deep purple of twilight. Darkness here wasn't gentle, it had teeth and claws. Close, Silas lied, though he had no idea where there was. His only goal was to stay off the trade roads where the red-robed inquisitors patrolled. "There's a rock hollow ahead. I remember a hollow." He shoved aside a branch thick with thorns, revealing a small recess beneath a sheer cliff face. It was dry, sheltered from the wind, and most importantly, hidden behind a curtain of giant ferns. "In," Silas jerked his chin. Elin squeezed inside. She shook off the sodden burlap, revealing a tunic patched more times than it was whole. She was shaking violently, her teeth clattering together like dice in a cup. The cold here didn't just numb the skin, it numbed the marrow. Silas followed, his bulk filling most of the cramped space. He unslung his pack and tossed it into the corner. He was a mountain of a man, hair and beard like tangled gray wire, smelling of cheap tobacco and old steel. "Don't look at me like that," Silas growled, seeing the girl shrinking away. "I'm not your mother to sing you lullabies. You want to survive the night? Make yourself useful." He pulled a handful of dry tinder and kindling wrapped in oilskin from his pouch. He began to strike the flint. His movements were efficient, precise, the hands of a man who had survived too many winters without a roof. When the fire caught, the warm amber glow pushed back the dark and the damp. The rock hollow transformed into a tiny world, isolated from the wrath of nature outside. Silas produced a loaf of black bread, hard as a stone, and a wedge of dry cheese. He used his dagger, a weapon that had slit more throats than he cared to count, to saw through the crust. "Take it," he handed Elin the larger portion, along with the softest part of the cheese. The girl took it with both hands, but she didn't eat. She stared at the bread, then at the fire. "Why aren't you eating?" Silas asked, tearing into his own share with savage hunger. "Afraid it's poisoned? If I wanted you dead, I'd have tossed you in the bog 3 days ago." "No," Elin whispered. "I'm saying thank you." "Thank who?" "Me. I got paid for this." "No," the girl shook her head. She closed her eyes, whispering in a strange tongue Silas had never heard. It wasn't the Latin of the church, nor the cant of thieves. It sounded like wind whistling through a canyon, like dry leaves skittering over stone. Silas stopped chewing. He narrowed his eyes. In the flickering firelight, he watched her. When she opened her eyes, Silas felt that familiar cold drop in his gut. Her eyes had no whites. They were pitch black rim to rim, deep pools of endless night. The eyes of the children of the Black Goat, the mark of the devil according to the church, or the mark of the old forest according to the nomads. "Stop that," Silas rasped, his voice dropping, heavy with warning. "Don't ever speak those words where strangers can hear. Do you want to burn?" Elin flinched, burying her face in the bread. "It's not a spell. Mother taught me, it's asking permission." "Permission?" Silas scoffed. "Permission from who?" "God." "Permission from the wheat," the girl said, her voice painfully innocent. "Mother said the wheat had to die, had to be crushed, had to be burned in the fire to become bread to keep us alive. So we must ask its permission and thank it for its pain. Silas fell silent. The bread in his mouth suddenly felt heavy like lead. He swallowed hard. The wheat must die to feed the man. A simple, brutal philosophy, yet full of reverence. He looked down at his own hands, scarred and stained. How many men had he killed to earn these meager meals? Had he ever asked their permission? Eat, Silas said, his voice losing its edge, leaving only exhaustion. The wheat doesn't care. It just wants you fed. They ate in silence. The rain drummed outside, but inside, the crackle of the fire created a fragile, counterfeit peace. Suddenly, Elin stopped eating. She lifted her head, those black eyes staring intently at the cave entrance. "There's crying," she whispered. Silas dropped his bread, his right hand snapping to the hilt of his sword. He strained his ears. Only wind and rain. "I hear nothing," he said, eyes scanning the dark. "Don't imagine things." "No." Elin stood up. She walked toward the entrance. "It hurts. It's calling." "Get back here," Silas hissed. "Sit down." It could be a wolf or worse, a man. But the child didn't listen. She bolted out into the rain. "Damn it all." Silas cursed, grabbing his sword and plunging after her. "Wretched girl. I'll tie you to a tree." He chased her small shadow through the thorns. The rain stung his face. They ran 50 paces until Elin stopped at the base of an old oak struck by lightning. She knelt in the mud. Silas arrived, sword raised, ready to cleave whatever horror awaited them. But there was no monster. No soldier. Only a red fox. The poor creature was caught in a rusted iron trap, a poacher's jaw set for wolves. The metal teeth had crushed its hind leg. The fox thrashed in desperation, blood swirling in the muddy puddle. Seeing the humans, it bared its teeth, a weak, high-pitched snarl of terror. "Step away," Silas said, lowering the sword but not sheathing it. "It's a fox. Leg smash. I'll finish it." He stepped forward to deliver the mercy. It was the only kindness he knew. A quick end. "No." Elin threw her arms out, shielding the animal. Her black eyes widened, locking onto Silas. "Don't kill it. It's just hurt. It will die of rot or wolves will eat it alive," Silas snapped. "Move, girl. The world has no place for broken things." The words hung in the air, inadvertently describing them both. A soldier with a broken soul and a child with a cursed bloodline. Elin didn't move. She turned her back on Silas, facing the animal that was mad with pain. "Careful. It'll bite," Silas warned. But then the strange thing happened. When Elin reached out her small, skeletal hand, the fox went silent. It stopped snarling. It looked into the girl's abyssal eyes, and it seemed to see something familiar. Empathy? Or the ancient authority of the black goat? Elin whispered those strange sounds again, sounds like rain on leaves. She gently touched the fox's head. The creature shuddered, then went limp, laying its head in the mud, surrendering to her touch. Silas stood frozen in the rain, the sword heavy in his hand. He watched the child, the one the church called the seed of ruin, struggling with her weak arms to pry open the heavy iron spring. She wasn't strong enough. "Uncle." Elin looked back, her eyes swimming with water that wasn't rain. "Please." Silas ground his teeth. He looked at the sky, at the mud, and cursed his own stupidity under his breath. He sheathed his sword. He stepped forward and knelt beside her. The smell of wet fur and iron blood filled his nose. "Hold its head," Silas ordered gruffly. "If it bites me, I'm making a hat out of it." Elin hurriedly cradled the fox's head, stroking its ears. Silas gripped the rusted jaws of the trap with his massive, scarred hands. He grunted, muscles corded under his sodden tunic. Clank. The trap sprang open. The fox whimpered, dragging its mangled leg free. It didn't run immediately. It turned, gave Elin's muddy hand a single rough lick, and then limped away into the undergrowth. Silas sat back in the mud, breathing hard. He felt like he had just done the most pointless thing in his life. Saving a fox so it could starve tomorrow? But when he turned, he saw Elin smiling. It was the first time he had seen her smile since he took this job. It lit up her grimy face, defying the darkness of her eyes. In that moment, she wasn't a monster. She was just a child who had saved a friend. "Thank you, Uncle," Elin said, her voice clear as a bell amidst the storm. Silas cleared his throat, standing up and brushing the mud from his aching knees. He tried to recover his cold exterior. "Don't get used to it," he grumbled, turning back toward the cave. "Next time we eat it." But his step was a fraction lighter. And the rain felt a little less cold. That night, in the hollow, the fire had died down to embers. Silas was still awake. He sat with his back against the stone, hand on his sword, watching the dark. Beside him, Elin was curled up, sleeping soundly. He looked at the child. The church said she was a demon. The villagers said she brought plague. But Silas remembered how she asked permission from the bread, and how she shielded the broken animal. If this is a demon, Silas whispered to the shadows, his hand unconsciously pulling the fur cloak higher over the girl's shoulders, then there are no angels left in this world. He closed his eyes, listening to the rain. Tomorrow they would face the Inquisitors, hunger, and the hunt. But tonight, at least tonight, in this small hole in the rock, there was a fragile, honest peace. And perhaps, just perhaps, he wasn't doing this only for the coin anymore. Dawn at the borderlands did not bring warmth. It simply traded the black of night for the suffocating gray of mist, rising like ghosts from the waterlogged earth. The torrential rain of the previous night had turned small brooks into roaring rivers of mud. The boundary river, the only thing separating them from the relative safety of the southern lands, had swollen, bursting its banks in a violent display of nature's fury. Silas stood crouched behind a dense thicket of thorns, eyes narrowed as he surveyed the valley below. His breath plumed in white clouds before him. "Damn it," he cursed under his breath, his hand tightening around the leather strap of his pack until the knuckles turned white. The hidden ford, the secret path he had counted on, was gone. It was buried under 10 feet of churning brown water. The only option left was the gray bridge, an ancient stone arch spanning the river's narrowest point. The problem was the gray bridge was never empty. Through the murky morning light, Silas could see the crimson banner of the church hanging sodden and heavy from the watchtower. A checkpoint. Soldiers in boiled leather armor, clutching long spears, were stopping every peasant and merchant wagon. And worse, standing tall amidst the grunts like a silver needle in a haystack, was a figure in a pristine cloak. A purifier. Lower in rank than an inquisitor perhaps, but twice as fanatical. They were bloodhounds, bred and trained for one purpose, to smell the scent of heresy. "We can't go that way," Elin whispered. She stood tucked behind Silas's massive frame, wrapped so tight in her layers she looked like a bundle of rags. Only her nose, red from the biting cold, was visible. She was clutching the tattered straw doll Silas had scavenged from a refuse pile 2 days ago. "We don't have wings to fly over the river, girl," Silas replied, his voice low and dry as grinding stones. "The floods have swallowed the back roads. If we want to leave this godforsaken land before the snows hit, we have to cross that bridge." "But, the man in silver," Elin trembled. "He smells of ash." "The smell of fanatics," Silas corrected grimly. He turned, dropping to one knee so his face was level with hers. He stared straight into the darkness beneath her hood. "Listen to me," Silas said, his tone grave, stripping away any pretense of gentleness. "From this moment on, you are mute. Do you understand? Mute. And simple. No matter what happens, no matter what they ask or what they do right in front of your eyes, you do not open your mouth. You do not look anyone in the eye. Look at my boots. Only at my boots. What if I'm scared? Then bite your tongue until it bleeds. If you show those eyes or whisper one of your strange thank yous to the wheat or the river water, I will be the first to die. They will hang me for harboring a witch and then they will throw you into the fire." Elin swallowed hard, nodding rapidly. She shrank deeper into her oversized cloak, trying to disappear. Silas stood up. He adjusted the sword at his hip, shifting it to look less like a weapon of war and more like the rusted tool of a washed-up mercenary. He scooped up a handful of mud and smeared it across Ellen's cheeks, then did the same to his own face. "Let's go. Remember, deaf and dumb." They merged into the queue of refugees snaking toward the checkpoint. The crowd was mostly farmers fleeing the famine, carrying their meager lives on creaking carts. The air was thick with the smell of sour sweat, wet livestock, and palpable fear. They inched forward, step by step. Thud, thud. The sound of a soldier's spear but banging against the side of a wagon ahead. Open it up. Any forbidden texts? Any marks of the black goat hidden in the grain? Here the church didn't look for gold. They looked for doubt. Silas hunched his shoulders, feigning a hacking, wet cough like a dying old man. His left hand gripped Ellen's shoulder like a vice, keeping her glued to his leg. He could feel her small body tense up, rigid as a board. Directly in front of them was an ox cart piled high with firewood. The owners were a gaunt old man and a boy about Ellen's age. The ox pulling the cart was skeletal, ribs showing through its hide. As it reached the slick, mossy cobblestones of the bridge's apex, its hooves slipped. The beast buckled. The cart tilted violently, blocking the narrow path. "Get up," You useless beast. A guard shouted, swinging the shaft of his spear and striking the ox's flank hard. The animal bellowed in pain, scrambling to rise but slipping again in the mud. Slush splattered the soldier's boots. Please, sir. Please don't hit him. The old man pleaded, clasping his hands in desperate prayer. He's just starved. Give me a minute. You are blocking the path of the light. The purifier in silver stepped forward. He didn't shout. He spoke with a terrifying, serene calmness. From his belt, he uncoiled a whip made of braided leather and silver wire. Crack. The whip descended. Not on the ox. On the old man's back. The old man collapsed face first into the mud, a cry of pure agony tearing from his throat. The little boy screamed, "Grandpa!" and rushed to help him, but a soldier backhanded him, sending the child sprawling. Delay is the seed of sloth, the purifier intoned, his voice rhythmic as if reciting scripture. And sloth is the gateway for the black goat to enter the soul. Crack. The whip struck a second time. Fresh blood bloomed on the old man's tattered tunic. Silas felt the small hand beneath his grip jerk violently. Elin was about to lunge. It was her instinct. Just like with the fox. She could not bear to witness pain. Silas tightened his grip on her shoulder. His hand became an iron clamp, rooting her to the spot. He squeezed so hard Elin let out a stifled whimper of pain. "Don't," Silas whispered through gritted teeth. His eyes remained fixed on the mud, but his right hand had secretly slipped inside his cloak, thumb resting on the hilt of his dagger. He was fighting a war inside himself. A part of him, the knight that had died years ago, wanted to draw steel and sever the silver-clad man's throat. But the cold, ruthless calculator in his brain screamed, "If you do that, you both die. And this child burns. He hurts." Elin whispered, tears cutting clean tracks through the mud on her face. "He hurts so much, uncle. Look at my boots." Silas hissed barely audibly, "If you take one step, I leave you here." It was a cruel threat, but necessary. The purifier raised his arm for a third strike. The little boy on the ground, in a fit of desperate rage, grabbed a stone and hurled it. It struck the purifier's shining silver greave. Clink. A tiny, insignificant scratch. The world went silent. Even the rain seemed to hold its breath. The purifier turned slowly to look at the boy. He smiled. A smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Resistance," he said softly. "The clearest sign of heresy." He signaled. Two soldiers stepped forward, hoisting the screaming, kicking boy by his arms. "Take him," the purifier decreed. "He requires purification in the bell tower." The grandfather tried to crawl forward, grabbing at the soldier's boot, but was kicked aside into the gutter. The crowd around them bowed their heads, turning their eyes away. No one dared to speak. Cowardice spread faster than the plague. Elin was shaking violently. Silas felt she was about to shatter. The energy around her, that strange hum of the old forest, was fluctuating. The pebbles at their feet began to vibrate, dancing in the mud. Silas knew he had to do something to break her focus. To distract her or distract himself. He leaned down and slapped Elin across the face. Smack. It wasn't a brutal blow, but it was sharp enough to stun her. She looked up at him, black eyes wide with shock and betrayal. The magical vibration ceased instantly. "I told you to stand still, you useless brat," Silas shouted, loud enough for the soldiers to hear. He slipped into the role of a coarse, abusive peasant uncle. "What are you blubbering about? You want me to toss you to the soldiers like that boy?" He grabbed Elin by the scruff of her neck and hauled her forward, shoving past the stalled ox cart. "Make way. Make way for me." Silas yelled at the crowd, roughly shoving the grieving old man aside. The act made bile rise in his throat, but he swallowed it. He had to become a monster to blend into a monstrous world. The purifier turned his gaze toward Silas. His eyes were sharp, dissecting. "You," he called out. "Halt." Silas's heart skipped a beat, but his face remained a mask of irritation and stupidity. He stopped, hand still gripping Elin's collar. "Lord?" Silas asked, his voice raspy, laced with fake servility. The purifier stepped closer. He looked at Silas, then down at Elin, who was staring at her boots, one cheek red from the slap. "You discipline your kin with a heavy hand," the purifier noted, his tone unreadable. "She's my half-wit niece, Lord," Silas spat on the ground. "Mother died early, father drank himself to death. She's deaf and dumb and her head ain't right. She sees people crying, she cries too. A real burden." The purifier stared at Elin. "Deaf?" he asked. Suddenly he clapped his hands loudly, right next to Elin's ear. Clap. Elin didn't flinch. She didn't blink. Silas thanked whatever gods were listening that the girl was so terrified she had frozen completely, inadvertently playing the part perfectly. The purifier nodded. Truly deaf. But those eyes. He reached out a gloved hand intending to lift Elin's chin. Silas held his breath. He calculated the distance. If the man touched her, if he saw the black scara, Silas would have to drive his dagger into the man's neck, shove Elin off the bridge into the swollen river, and pray the flood took them before the arrows did. "Lord," Silas interjected quickly, his free hand fumbling in his tunic, producing a small leather pouch. It was his last remaining coin. "Please have mercy. The girl had the pox when she was a babe. Her face is scarred and pockmarked, truly hideous. I fear it would offend your eyes. Here, a small offering, for the church's good work." He pressed the pouch into the purifier's hand. The silver coins clinked softly. The purifier glanced at the pouch, then at Silas. A flicker of greed replaced the religious suspicion in his eyes. His hand withdrew from Elin. "Very well." The purifier waved his hand dismissively, tucking the pouch into his belt. "The Lord teaches us to be tolerant of the afflicted. Begone. Don't let her infect anyone." "Thank you. Thank you for your benevolence, Lord." Silas bowed low, dragging Elin past the checkpoint. They walked quickly across the bridge. Behind them, the wails of the captured boy echoed against the stone, fading with distance but never leaving their minds. They walked for 2 miles without stopping, until the gray bridge was lost behind the veil of a dense pine forest. Silas finally let go of Elin. He leaned back against a tree, sliding down until he hit the damp earth, gasping for air as if he had just outrun death itself. Cold sweat soaked his tunic. Elin stood in the middle of the path, surrounded by rotting leaves. She wasn't crying anymore. She just stood there, clutching the straw doll so tight the seams were bursting. "Why?" she asked. Her voice was cold, stripped of her usual innocence. "Why what?" Silas asked, uncorking his water skin and taking a long swig to steady his nerves. "Why did you hit me? Why did you push that old man? Why didn't you save his friend?" Silas stopped drinking. He looked at the girl. Her black eyes bored into his soul, acting as judge, jury, and executioner. "Because I want to live," Silas replied bluntly. "And I want you to live." "To live like this?" Elin shouted, a sudden explosion of anger from such a small frame. "To live watching others hurt? To live by being the villain? If this is how the world works, then I'd rather be caught." Silas stood up abruptly. He stepped forward, grabbing Elin by the shoulders and shaking her. "Listen to me, girl," he roared, unleashing his own frustration and fear. "You think being a hero is easy? You think drawing a sword is brave? No. It's stupid." He pointed back toward the direction of the bridge. "If I drew my sword back there, I might have killed 1, maybe 2 of them. Then what? They would have hacked me to pieces. And you? You would be dragged to a dungeon and tortured until you begged for death. That boy was taken, he will suffer, yes, but he is alive. The old man was beaten, but he is alive. If I intervened, everyone dies. Blood would flow like that river." Silas panted, staring into Elin's eyes. "The price of protecting the one person who matters most is that sometimes you have to let others suffer. That is not cowardice. That is a burden. And if you want to survive long enough to reach the place you need to go, to do things greater than saving a fox or 1 boy, then you have to learn to swallow that burden just like I did." Elin looked at him. The anger in her eyes slowly faded, replaced by a painful, premature understanding. She looked at the mud smeared on Silas's cheek, the mud he applied to debase himself. She looked at his trembling hand. She realized the slap hadn't just hurt her, it had hurt Silas 10 times more. He had forced himself to become a monster in the eyes of the world to shield her. Elin stepped forward and wrapped her small arms around Silas's leg. She buried her face in his filthy cloak. "I'm sorry," she sobbed, a muffled, choking sound. "I'm sorry I made you be the bad man." Silas stiffened. He wasn't used to being held. Awkwardly, he placed a large hand on her head, gently ruffling her tangled hair. "I was already a bad man, kid," he whispered, his voice cracking. "A little more bad reputation won't hurt." He looked south, where the road stretched endlessly into the mist. "Let's go. We have a long way. And I promise, next time if I can, I won't let anyone cry." It was an empty promise. He knew it. But it was the only thing he could offer the child in a world that was falling apart. A sliver of hope, even if it was a lie. The pine forest thinned, giving way to desolate, mist-draped hills. It was late afternoon, and the weak winter sun struggled to pierce the leaden clouds, casting streaks of pale milk-curdled light across the grass. Silas walked with a limp. The ache in his knee had turned from a dull throb to biting ice. He knew he needed rest, but more importantly he needed a hidden place to dry Elin's clothes. The girl had been silent for 2 miles, her lips blue with cold. There, Silas pointed toward a high mound of earth. Atop the mound stood a ruin of stone. It had once been a small wayside chapel, built centuries ago for pilgrims. Now the roof had half collapsed, and the bell tower was nothing but a bare skeletal ribcage pointing at the sky. "Is that God's house?" Elin asked, her voice hoarse. "An empty house," Silas corrected. "God moved out a long time ago." They climbed the overgrown slope. The heavy oak doors had rotted off their hinges, lying defeated on the earth. Inside, the air smelled of damp moss and bird droppings, but at least it broke the wind. Silas cleared a dry corner beneath the section of roof that remained intact. He gathered rotten wood from broken pews and started a fire. This time, the flames caught quickly, licking at the dry timber and radiating precious warmth. "Come here," Silas waved his hand. Elin crept forward, sitting close to the fire. She peeled off the sodden cloak, revealing thin clothes plastered to her skin. Silas took a sheepskin blanket from his pack, the only dry thing left, and draped it over her. "Stay put. I'm checking the perimeter." Silas stood, hand on his sword. He never trusted absolute safety. He circled the chapel interior. He saw statues of saints with their faces smashed in, marks of past purges. Anything not sanctioned by the church was deemed an idol. He stopped before a statue in a shadowed alcove. It was a small stone carving of a woman cradling a sheaf of wheat. The head was missing, but the hands still held the grain gently. At its feet, someone had placed a withered wildflower. "Someone still remembers the old gods," Silas muttered. Suddenly a sound. Clink. Metal against stone. It came from behind the ruined altar. Silas held his breath. He moved as silently as a cat, his sword sliding inch by inch from its scabbard without a whisper. He hugged the altar, peering into the shadows behind it. Someone was there. A figure lay curled in the corner, covered by a familiar dark crimson cloak. The red of the church guard. Killing intent flared in Silas's eyes. He didn't hesitate. He lunged, the tip of his sword pressing instantly against the stranger's throat. "Don't move," Silas growled, "or I'll send you to meet your God right now." The figure jolted, trying to scramble up, but pain sent him collapsing back. A helmet rolled across the floor, revealing the face of a boy. A very young boy. 16, maybe 17. His face was dotted with freckles, his blue eyes wide with terror. He held no weapon. His hands were clutching a thigh clumsily bandaged with torn strips of tunic. Fresh blood was seeping through, soaking his trousers. "Please." The young soldier wheezed, his voice trembling on the verge of tears. "Don't kill me. I have nothing." Silas didn't lower his sword. In his mind, every red coat was an enemy. "What are you doing here? Where is your unit?" Silas hissed. "No one. I'm alone." The boy coughed violently. "I fell behind, wounded. They left me." "Wounded?" Silas glanced at the leg. A deep gash, the edges swollen and angry. Not a battle wound. It looked like animal teeth. "Wolf?" "No." The boy swallowed hard. "A hound. The Purifiers' hound. I accidentally spilled water on his lordship's boots." Silas froze. He looked closer at the soldier. The leather armor was oversized, old, clearly a hand-me-down. His hands didn't have the calluses of a swordsman, but the cracked skin of a plowman. A peasant boy conscripted by force. Bitten by his own commander's dog and left to die of infection. "Uncle?" Elin's voice came from behind. Silas flinched, but he didn't turn. "Stay there, Elin." But Elin had already stepped forward. Wrapped in the blanket, only her black eyes were visible. She saw Silas's sword tip, and she saw the young soldier cowering in the dirt. "He's bleeding," Elin said, her voice strangely calm. "He's a red coat," Silas grated out. "He is the enemy." "He is a child," Elin countered. She stepped past Silas, approaching the soldier. "Don't come closer." The boy shouted, trying to drag himself away. He looked at Elin as if he were seeing a ghost. Don't. Are you scared?" Elin asked, squatting down in front of him, keeping a safe distance. "My uncle is scary, but he doesn't kill people without reason." Silas sighed, lowering his sword. The tension in his muscles drained away, replaced by exhaustion. He couldn't kill a kid dying of fever and fear. It reminded him too much of himself at 16, thrown into a war with a rusted spear and an empty belly. Name? Silas asked, sheathing his blade. Kale, the boy mumbled. All right, Kale. If you want to survive the night, shut your mouth and don't cause trouble. Silas returned to the fire, grabbing a water skin and some clean cloth from his meager medical kit. He tossed them to Kale. Clean it yourself. I'm not a nursemaid. Kale caught the water skin with shaking hands. He looked at Silas with a mix of gratitude and suspicion. Why? Kale stammered. Why didn't you kill me? I'm a church soldier. Because you look pathetic, Silas snorted, sitting by the fire and skewering a piece of dried meat to roast. And because the girl would cry loudly if I did. I hate noise. Kale fell silent. He gritted his teeth, pouring water over the wound. The pain made him whimper, tears streaming down his face. Elin watched him. She crept closer, holding out half of her portion of bread. Eat, Elin said. The bread has been asked for permission. It won't give you a stomach ache. Kale looked at the black bread, then at Elin's abyssal eyes. He had been taught that people with eyes like that were demons, seeds of disaster that needed to be purged. But this demon was sharing food with him, while his brothers in faith had left him to rot. Kale took the bread, biting off a large chunk. He ate ravenously as if he hadn't eaten in days. Thank you, he said, mouth full. Thank you. Night deepened. Outside, the wind whistled through the cracks of the broken bell tower, sounding like a mournful flute. Inside, 3 people sat around the fire. An old mercenary, a cursed child, and a deserter. A strange company. I didn't want to join the army, Kale spoke suddenly, breaking the silence. He stared into the flames. My home is in the Western Valley. The harvest failed, my father owed taxes. They said if I served, the debt would be cleared. Silas nodded slightly. An old story. He had heard it 1,000 times. They gave me a spear, taught me how to stab, Kale continued, his voice choking. They said we were fighting for the light, to sweep away the darkness. But all I saw was burning houses and beating old men. He looked up at Silas. Are you a heretic? Silas gave a dry, crooked smile. I'm a man who believes in gold and steel, kid. Gods don't pay me. Kale looked at Elin, who was dozing off against Silas's side. And the girl, those eyes. She's sick, Silas cut him off, his tone hardening. And that's none of your business. Kale fell silent for a long time. He bowed his head. I know, he whispered. I've seen people like her put on the pyre. They didn't do anything. They were just different. He fumbled in his pocket, pulling out a small brass object. It was a sun-shaped badge, the insignia of the guard. I hate this, Kale said, and tossed the badge into the fire. The metal heated up, slowly tarnishing in the red coals. It was a small act, but it carried the weight of abdication. Kale had shed the identity of a soldier. Now he was just Kale, a wounded farm boy. Tomorrow I'm going west, Kale said. Even if I have to crawl. I'd rather die in my family's potato field than die for a church dog. Silas looked at him. A rare flicker of respect sparked in his eyes. The road west is full of wolves, Silas said, then tossed his spare dagger to Kale. Keep it. Don't die before you see the potatoes. Kale caught the knife. He looked at it like it was a treasure. Thank you. The next morning when Silas woke up, Kale was gone. He had left the dagger behind, perhaps out of pride, but he had left something else on the flat stone where they had eaten. A map, drawn crudely with charcoal on a scrap of cloth. Silas picked it up. It was a map of the southern border region. On it, Kale had marked a small trail cutting through the cliffs, accompanied by scrawled words, abandoned outpost. No guards. Silas smiled. He folded the cloth and tucked it into his breast pocket. Wake up, sleepworm, he shook Elin's shoulder. We have a path. Elin rubbed her eyes, sitting up. She looked around for Kale. Where is brother Kale, uncle? Gone. Back to plant potatoes. Elin looked at the pile of ash, where the brass badge lay melted and deformed. Is he a bad person, uncle? Elin asked. Silas adjusted his pack, looking out the entrance where the morning sun was beginning to pierce the mist. No, Silas replied. Just a lost soul wearing the wrong coat. He led Elin out of the ruined chapel. Remember this lesson, kid, Silas said as they descended the grassy hill. Not everyone holding a spear wants to kill. And not everyone wearing a red cloak is a demon. Sometimes they are just scared children waiting for someone to give them a piece of bread. Elin nodded, gripping Silas's hand tight. Like you, she said. You hold a sword, but you gave me bread. Silas paused for a beat, then cleared his throat, trying to hide his embarrassment. Walk faster. Enough with the nonsense. They continued their journey south, following the path the enemy had shown them. The sky today seemed higher and bluer,